Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Work Well podcast. This episode is brought to you in partnership with AJ Products, who are leading the way in ergonomic and active workplace furniture solutions at ajproducts.ie. Today in the Work Well podcast, I'm delighted to welcome Richie Butler. Richie is head of Occupational Health and Wellbeing with global construction company John SISK & Son. He's responsible for building the health and wellbeing function and setting the strategic objectives for the SISK Group in terms of health promotion, health protection, and health management. If you want to approach health and wellbeing in the workplace in the right way, then you really need to listen to this episode. So SISK are the first organization, well, certainly that I'm aware of, that have made ISO 45003 a strategic priority. So if you're anyway interested in mental well-being in the workplace, then you don't want to miss my conversation with Richie Butler. Richie, hello and welcome to the Work Well podcast.
How are you doing, Brian? Great to be here.
I'm great. Thank you. Great to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Yeah, good. Everything's going well on the home front, on the work front, so can't complain.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a good place to be. So bring us up to speed, Richie, for the listeners who won't know who you are. You're almost 2 years now at SISK Group. You're head of Occupational Health and Wellbeing. Maybe tell us how you got there, first of all.
Sure, yeah. I'll go back to the start, I suppose, Brian. So my background actually originally was HR. So I did my undergrad in DCU in HR. I won't say how many years ago, but a fair few years ago.
We probably overlapped there, I'd say.
What's that?
We possibly overlapped at DCU.
We could have done. Yeah. So I did my undergrad in DCU in HR. Did the usual, sort of went off and traveled for a couple of years. Worked in South Korea for a year teaching English, which was probably the highlight of those times. I would say my first proper job really was with Deloitte. Did 3 years with Deloitte in a HR role. And I probably just didn't see myself staying in HR long term, if I'm being honest. So I made the decision after 3 years to bite the bullet, go back to college, back to DCU, did my postgrad in health and safety in DCU. And came out the other side of that, worked in health and social care, in a health and social care environment for 5 years, in a health and safety role. Mm-hmm. And I would say that definitely that's the role that sort of sparked my real interest in the area of mental health. So I was sort of thinking about this over the last few days, and I was sort of tracking back through the years, and I was thinking actually it's probably about 10 or 11 years ago was the first time that I did mental health first aid training. Mm-hmm. Within that health and social care environment. And at that stage, it was actually Mental Health First Aid Scotland. There was no such thing as Mental Health First Aid Ireland at the time. So it had come from Australia, gone to Scotland. So that's definitely where my interest in the whole area of mental health was peaked. As I said, I was in that role for 5 years. I then moved into a more specialized health and wellbeing role with Bord Gais Energy, which I absolutely loved. Did that for 5 years. Qualified as a nutrition and health coach during that time as well. Because I would have a strong interest in the area of nutrition. And as you said, then I made what I would probably call the big step or the big jump into a brand new role with SISK, just coming up 2 years now. So I went in as their head of Occupational Health and Wellbeing. Most recently I have just finished my thesis and my master's, thankfully. So I was doing a master's in occupational health down in UCC. So great to be out the other side of that, to be honest. So that brings you up to present day.
That's a great introduction there, and it's a great mix of education and experience in there, and it's very clear kind of the path you chose. So thanks for sharing that. I'm interested in let's say the postgrad in DCU in health and safety, and then that role you took up for 5 years in health and safety. We're probably going back about 7 to 12 years or so. would I be right in saying, was there a focus on physical health and safety at that time, or would you say it was that even split? It was the psychosocial plus physical, or because I've just got this idea in my head that health and safety, or at least the traditional role, was a main focus on physical health and safety.
Yeah, I think that'd be a fair point. If my memory serves me right, I know we had modules around occupational health and toxicology and chemical agents. I don't recall anything around psychosocial hazards, work-related stress, that kind of side of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I said, that's going back more than 10 years ago. So the landscape has obviously changed significantly since then.
Yeah. Okay, great. We'll come to that, but that's interesting to hear that, actually. Yeah. So bring us up to speed on the current role then at SISK. It's Head of Occupational Health and Wellbeing. Is it possible to give us what a typical day or week might look like in that role?
Yeah, it's a nice catchy title anyway, isn't it? Yeah, it's probably hard to give you a typical day, to be honest, Brian. A typical week or a typical month, maybe. I suppose what you have with my role is you have a relatively new role. So I came into it brand new, as I said, in October 2019. But you obviously have two areas to an extent. You've got the well-being side of things, and then you've got the more compliance-driven occupational health side of things. It's trying to bring those two areas together. So if you think about the Occ health side of things, off the top of my head, some of the things we're currently working on, we are working on sort of flu vaccination programs now as we head into the winter months. We are working on a health screening program for all staff for the start of 2022. Do a lot of stuff, a lot of overlap with our HR teams in Ireland and the UK. So that's around fitness for task, fitness for role, health surveillance, safety critical worker medicals, return to work processes, referring into our Occ health services. And then you have all those nice big chunky health hazards in construction. So your noise, your dust, your vibration, your asbestos, your ergonomics, all of that kind of stuff. So that's very much the compliance driven side of the role. I suppose on the flip side of that, then you have the well-being side of things, which is more around the health promotion and the health supports or the health management side of things. So again, some of the things we're working on at the moment. We've just finished up a piece around digital resilience. So we've run a number of sessions in that area just to try and make people, I suppose, more conscious of their digital use, their technology use, and taking back control of that. Big focus now around emotional well-being. So we're working with a production company in the UK around doing a theatre piece around mental health destigmatization. So again, it's just trying to look at different ways of messaging things. I manage our EAP service. I manage our digital wellbeing platform, our informal peer support program that we have running right across the SISK Group. It's pretty varied, to be honest, Brian. And I guess that's one of the things I love about the role. Yeah,
a lot going on, clearly. I imagine you're not on your own there, right? You've got a team of people supporting you with this?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So initially when I come in, as I said, it was a brand new role. So it was me on my own for the first year. And that was really just for me to, I guess, understand where we are as a business, what needs to be our focus areas, our priorities, where we have the gaps, and then kind of go from there in terms of building a function and building a team. So thankfully, it's now myself. We have somebody based in the UK, and that person focuses a little bit more on the occupational health side of things. And then we have somebody in Ireland as well who focuses more on the health promotional, the well-being side of things. So we've kind of got a nice mix, I guess, between the health promotion and the Occ health side of things, and we've got a good mix of experience and knowledge. So yeah, a team of 3 for now.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, good stuff. Yeah, and I'd say potential to add to that team in the future as well, given the amount of work that's involved here. Just out of curiosity, do you know, it was before your time, but do you know what are the origins of this role? Because a lot of organizations there maybe who who are considering a role like this, considering doing this properly, if you like, in their workplaces. Do you know where the demand for the role came from, or where the ideas for the role came from initially?
I think where it came from, Brian, was just firstly, SISK is a very big company. So we've obviously got close to 100 projects dotted across Ireland, the UK, and mainland Europe. So it's a big organization with a big span, a big spread of employees. Huge focus, as you'd imagine, on the safety side of things, as you'd expect in a sort of a high risk environment. But I think there was just an acknowledgement, a recognition that they needed to move the dial a little bit more back towards the I know it sounds a bit cliche, but the H in H&S. So what are we actually doing to manage the health side of things?
Right.
And that was really the origins of the role, because whilst you have a big, dedicated, very competent health and safety team, I think they just felt that there was a need for somebody to really grasp the health side and bring that up to a par with the safety side of things. So that was really I suppose the motivation or the origins for creating this role initially. And you're right as well, going back to your previous point, like the health and wellbeing agenda in SISK is not going to shrink. It's going to grow. It's going to continue to grow. And as you said, there's every chance that our team and the function will continue to grow, because it's still quite early days.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to see organizations like SISK and others that are, creating these roles, creating these teams as well. Long overdue, but it's great to see it happen. And I'm seeing more and more roles being created. So that's a definite positive step, and great to hear of the work you're starting there effectively, as you say. Any thoughts on, so this is your 2 years in now, or almost 2 years in. It's construction industry. It's you made the leap from Bord Gais Energy. What's it like? How could you describe maybe the differences of working in the construction industry?
It's interesting when I sort of look back, when I was doing a bit of prep for this, and I was looking back over my career to date, and actually every move I've made, I've moved industry.
Right.
So I kind of, in my head, I'm going, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not really sure. So I would consider myself to be very much still in the learning mode in terms of construction. So I go out to a construction site, and I try to get out to the sites as much as I can, because that's really important for us in terms of building the profile of the team and building my own profile and just making connections with people. So I kind of go out with the mindset of just trying to learn 1 or 2 new things today about construction. So it's been challenging for sure, I would say. In terms of going back to that point about the just how big the organization is and the span of the organization. So as I said, up to 100 kind of projects and locations across multiple jurisdictions. And that brings its own challenges in terms of differences around legislation, working with different service providers in different jurisdictions. And I think one of the other challenges as well is it's very much male-dominated organization, very much a male-dominated industry, for sure. And we know that men are not as good at engaging when it comes to health and well-being. So that's a challenge. That's an ongoing piece of work. That's something that we try and improve on all the time. But yeah, like as I said, for me, I would still consider myself very much to be in the learning phase, the very early stages of my career in construction. And yeah, every day is a learning day for me at the moment.
Yeah, and a great way to look at things. Absolutely. And any thoughts, or have you made any kind of progress on because the question that comes up all the time in the WorkWell community is, how do we get more men involved or engaged in our wellbeing activities? Now, in fairness, that usually comes from organizations where maybe there's a roughly a 50-50 split now, men and women. And any thoughts just on a male-dominated environment? How anything you've had success with in getting more men engaged?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so typically construction, you're talking about 90% male. Yeah. Now SISK would be leading the way, so we'd be a little bit better than that. And there's a huge amount of work happening within the organization around trying to I suppose, to make our workplaces and make our organization more female friendly and attracting more females into it, which is great. But in terms of the engagement of males, I suppose, look, the science will tell us that males tend to respond better to their male peers. So what we're trying to do is, instead of me sitting in head office and sending out an email and trying to encourage people to take part in things, we actually want people across the organization to tell their personal stories and to try and encourage their colleagues and their peers to get involved in programs. And we're doing more and more of that, and we're finding that actually it's having a better response, better uptake in terms of programs. And again, that's not about sending out emails. That's actually about trying to get people to do short little video pieces, sharing their personal stories. And that does tend to resonate. That does tend to resonate with their colleagues. So we are seeing a better response in terms of our programs and our initiatives. I think there's some other things we're working on as well. We're just in the process of rolling out a sort of new Wellbeing Champions program. We have now dedicated Wellbeing Champions right across all of the business units and the functions within SISK. And we're making sure that those Wellbeing Champions are being properly upskilled to affect positive behavior change in terms of health, and to be able to know how to engage people that probably need these interventions the most. So a piece of work we've done recently is with a colleague of mine from a former role who's a behavior therapist. We brought him in to actually do an initial session with the Wellbeing Champions around trying to engage people and what's the best way to go about that. And then we're going to do another follow-up session with him in the next couple of months as well. So yeah, there's definitely some things that are working in there. The personal stories piece is for sure working, and just trying to I guess just trying to connect with people at that peer level.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I mean, peers leading by example is, it's one of the best ways to engage people, isn't it? And it's one of the best ways to bring people on the journey with you as well. So it's not seen as, I guess, our wellbeing initiative, our wellbeing programming is not seen as just a HR or kind of coming from head office, from the head of wellbeing. This is actually something we're involved with. And it sounds like you have that structure, or you're creating that structure with the Wellbeing Champion Network to have these guys. These are the boots on the ground, if you like, inputting into the process, feeding back, engaging with their colleagues and with their peers. So it sounds like you're putting a really strong structure in place for that.
Yeah, and I suppose the other thing that was important for us as well in terms of the Wellbeing Champions was, for the most part, we wanted those people to be site-based, to be project-based. So we have, if you like, almost that reach into the projects, because it's probably easier for me and for my team to get out to the offices and things like that. But just with so many projects across Ireland and the UK and Europe, we need, as you said, those boots on the ground, those people at project level that could really try and influence and nudge and encourage people to get involved in things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like, I guess you've got so many different role types, as you mentioned, the sites, office-based employees as well. So it's important that everyone's kind of represented on that Wellbeing Champion team.
Yeah, for sure.
Just a quick question on that. Sharing stories, personal stories, I think is powerful. It's really powerful. Any thoughts on like, how do you do that in a safe way? As in, you're not putting people under pressure to tell their stories. It's just that it's a natural thing. If somebody feels comfortable doing so, absolutely go ahead and do it. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really important point, and it's something I'd be very conscious of. It's one thing getting a person to share a personal story. It's another thing to make sure that that's not leaving them feeling exposed or feeling vulnerable afterwards. So just to give you an example, earlier on in the year we did it's the first time we've done it since I've joined, but we actually did a kind of smoking cessation program. And being very honest, I was thinking to myself, I'm not sure what sort of response we're going to get to this. And I was probably even managing the expectations of the guys in my team that were leading on it. And I said, look, we mightn't get anybody signing up for this, but we know it's a good thing to do, so let's go with it. So again, instead of just sending out the email, we actually just put a note out and looked for a volunteer who was an ex-smoker who would be comfortable in sharing their story, doing a video piece. So we worked very closely with that person who came forward. So I would never want to put anybody under pressure to share their personal story unless they're really comfortable in doing so. But we worked very closely with that individual, you know, in terms of the questions, what they were comfortable actually responding to. Made sure obviously in advance that they were very clear that this was something that was going to be shared across the business. And we just stayed very close to that person, you know, sort of recording the video once it was produced, making sure they were comfortable with the final product. And again, then once it was actually launched as well, as making sure that we stayed in contact with that person, and also acknowledged that they had stood up and put themselves out there. And again, you know, the response we had was brilliant. It was far exceeded what we would have thought. You know, we had over 20 people that signed up for that program, and we kind of said, look, you know, if we get one person to the end of that program as an ex-smoker, then that's gold. That's a huge success in terms of somebody's long-term health.
Exactly, and that person might be you know, a future candidate to share a personal story. Then, and there you go. It's someone who's come through the actual program itself.
Exactly. Yeah. I suppose maybe the slightly trickier side of the personal stories piece is in the mental health space. So again, it's, you know, we are doing something coming up pretty soon, again, around personal stories, and again, just trying to connect with people at a different level and resonate with people, and again, normalize those conversations and how that feeds into breaking down the barriers around stigma and shame that unfortunately still do exist. But we're managing that one even more carefully, I would say, to make sure that the people who have put themselves forward, again, fully understand what the personal story is going to be used for internally. Because I really want to make sure we can't put any of those people in a situation where they feel exposed having done that video piece.
Exactly.
It just needs to be given, you know, plenty of sort of care and thought, and make sure that we really have the right people, and make sure that they're volunteering for it rather than somebody putting them under pressure to do it, because that's absolutely not the right way to go about it.
Yeah, exactly. So they're volunteering, and they're fully supported before, during, and after then as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's been a challenging 18 months for every organization and industry. I'd say we're all probably familiar with the stories around the construction industry when it was totally shut down, and then it was kind of half back for a while. Was there anything in particular you were doing, you know, around that time or during the past 18 months, I guess, to engage your colleagues, and any kind of interesting projects that stand out? I'm thinking, because it's easy enough, I guess, well, for some, if you're office based, maybe to continue working from home, but if you're based on a site, you're probably going from, you know, full day, full weeks to sitting at home, you know, pretty much doing nothing. Any interesting kind of stories or projects that you might have worked on around that time?
Yeah, and again, just, you know, it's probably worth bearing in mind as well that whilst the construction industry in Ireland was sort of on off a couple of times, the construction industry in the UK never stopped.
Right.
So they've gone right through. So you kind of have these differing sort of work environments and differing situations for our employees. I mean, again, within the context of my role from the health side of things, a lot of, you know, a lot of the stuff that we were doing was obviously in response to COVID, to trying to make sure that our work environments were as COVID secure as possible. And that's everything from, you know, like rapid antigen testing to temperature screening to all of the hygiene controls, ventilation, PPE, everything. So whilst we were trying to do a number of well-being interventions and initiatives, the core focus, to be honest, was around COVID and trying to make sure that we were managing that as best we could in what was obviously a very fast changing, evolving situation. So you find in some situations you're trying to write documents and procedures and presentations, and they're nearly out of date before you can even get them out there and get them delivered. But in terms of the kind of the well-being, the interventions, look, we did some of the fairly bog standard stuff, to be honest. You know, we ran a 10-week sort of online exercise program, a couple of evenings a week for people. That was really well received. We did a couple of really good sessions with Professor Luke O'Neill. So we did a Q&A, we did a couple of Q&As with them. So we came in September of last year. So this is obviously pre-vaccine. So really just, he's a very positive sort of kind of guy.
Fantastic communicator.
Yeah, he's a great communicator. He's a pretty straight shooter as well. So as I said, he came in, we had a huge response to that. We actually brought him back in then April of this year to do a follow-up Q&A, because we were obviously at that stage, we were in the throes of rolling out this mass vaccination program. And again, it was just around trying to cut through some of the stuff that's out there in terms of vaccine hesitancy or resistance, and again, just sort of giving us the science and letting people then make informed decisions around their vaccinations. Did a really interesting intervention earlier on this year. I won't mention the company, but it's a fairly well-known mindfulness-based app. And what we actually did was we looked for volunteers across the business. We got just over 100 people to participate in an 8-week program. And we did a sort of a pre-intervention and post-intervention questionnaire. And I suppose the whole idea of it was to look at the impact of mindfulness on mental fitness.
Right.
So again, you know, it would be easy for us. It would be easier for organizations to go, right, this is a great tool. This is a great app. Let's just go and roll it out to the entire business.
Yeah.
And you get a really small response. You could get a really small uptake on it. So we said, right, let's just try and be a little bit more informed and scientific about some of these things. So yeah, like, you know, that's where I want to go with a lot of our programs and initiatives, is be a little bit more informed in terms of the decisions that we make, and, you know, what's really going to benefit our people. I think what else we did. So last year, you know, going back to kind of the early part of the pandemic, we rolled out a new digital wellbeing platform for all SISK employees right across the group. So that's to be honest, that's just an enduring sort of piece of work. It's never going to be sort of probably where I want it to be in terms of engagement and getting people interacting with the platform. So it's a work in progress. But I suppose what it allowed us to do was it did allow us to bring people together a little bit more in terms of having access to all of the well-being content in one place. So whether that's, you know, pretty much articles on every health and well-being related topic you could think of, podcasts, breathing exercises, well-being assessments, self-paced Care Now programs. So it's sort of all wrapped up into the well-being platform. So yeah, so we expedited the rollout of that at the early part of the pandemic. Yeah, so look, there's just a flavor of some of the things we've been trying to do, but as I said, you know, I qualify that by saying it's all in the context of trying to make our workplaces as COVID secure as possible. Yeah,
well, an awful lot going on there. It's like you're saying, like I have this 8-step framework, which I'm sure you've come across, about, you know, developing a sustainable workplace well-being program. And just listening to the conversation here today, so you're gathering that data. That's step number 3, which is something people often overlook. But you're gathering meaningful data around just that mindfulness app there. Simple enough stuff, but really important as well, just to see what impact are we having, the pre and the post. So, you know, I love that. You've already mentioned the Wellbeing Champion Network. That would be step number 2, creating that network, kind of shared ownership for wellbeing. And then I'm thinking, like, I imagine, you know, creating your role in the first place in this team has to be, it's a leadership decision. It's leadership, commitment, and alignment. So that's step number 1. So there's your 3 kind of foundational steps there that I'm getting anyway from what you're doing there. So, you know, for anyone listening in, they are the 3 kind of foundational steps, and anything else you build on top of that like their operating plan and choosing the interventions. That comes later, that comes after this. But yeah, there's your really key foundational steps there.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think the point around the data and the information is really, really important, because I think it's very easy to go down a route where you're just rolling out lots and lots of well-being programs and interventions, and they look good on paper, but actually, are they the right programs for your workforce? Are they actually going to be effective in terms of tackling, you know, the health risks that an organization might have? And I suppose that I'm very excited about this upcoming health screening program that we're looking at doing in the early parts of 2022, because apart from that obviously being hugely beneficial at an individual level in terms of early intervention and picking up on issues that that staff may not otherwise pick up on, that's obviously massive. But the data and the information that we get back from that at a high level, of course, we don't get any
anonymized data for the whole.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. But the information, if we can get a really good response to that health screening program, so if we can get a good response in terms of health screening is, 70% is a really, really good uptake when it comes to health screening. So if we could get that kind of a response and get aggregated data, that gives us a really good insights into the health status of our business. Yeah. So where are the health risks? Exactly, yeah. It tells us things like X percentage of SISK employees have blood pressure that's in the high risk area. Well, then we can kind of go, right, we can now make more informed decisions in terms of our programs going forward.
Absolutely, and that's exactly how it should work as well. So great to hear you're doing that, and this will give you your baseline, if you like. You can check. I imagine you'll be doing this year on year. You'll check year on year. Well, are we moving in the right direction here? Is there a particular area now we need to focus on where improvements are needed? So this will give you fantastic data, as you said, kind of aggregated, anonymized data, but just at a high level to understand, like, are the initiatives and the interventions that we're choosing, are they making a difference for our colleagues? Are we moving in the right direction?
Yeah, and there's lots of other pieces to that. As I said, we're building out. So we're building out some health and wellbeing performance reporting dashboards at the moment as well, that we can look at things like utilization rates for EAP. Again, it's all completely anonymized, as everyone knows. Things like OC Health referrals, fitness for work. What are the presenting issues, or what are the reasons that we are referring people for different things? Yeah. So it'll all just build up into a much better understanding and allowing us to make much more informed decisions going forward.
Absolutely. And then a common question again in the community is, what should we be tracking first of all? Well, I say, well, what do you need to track? But then, the next question then is, well, what are others track? What are other organizations tracking? How are they measuring what they're doing? So, great to hear what you're doing and how you're measuring internally there, because I think that's great for everyone listening in, just to give them some ideas of what they could be doing. So listen, thanks for sharing that.
No problem.
We've seen, and we kind of touched on this at the very beginning of our chat, almost a shift, if you like, from physical health and safety to more of a focus on psychosocial health and safety. And I guess the construction industry, maybe in particular, is kind of famed for the quality, high standards of physical health and safety. Kind of, it's almost necessary in the work environment. But I think there's a real focus, and certainly you're involved in this, and moving attention, or keeping up that focus on physical health and safety, but also bringing awareness to the psychosocial health and safety as well. Any kind of projects you're involved in there that in that area?
Yeah, and look, you're right. There's a huge focus on the whole area of sort of psychosocial risk and work-related stress and mental health, and rightly so. If you look at the stats and the figures from the construction industry, it doesn't make for good reading when it comes to mental health. And that's not just in Ireland, that's across developing countries. So if you look at the UK, for example, one construction worker dies by suicide every day.
Is that right?
If you look at Australia, you're 6 times more likely to die by suicide than a workplace accident if you work in construction.
No way.
So the figures are pretty stark, and I think there's an acknowledgement of that, not just within SISK, but within the construction industry, that this is something we absolutely have to address. So I mentioned at the start, obviously, that I've just finished my thesis on my master's, and my thesis topic was work-related stress in construction.
Right.
And I guess really my main motivator for picking that topic was to try and really open up the conversation around work-related stress, around psychosocial risk, and what can we do to actually to address the challenges. You've obviously got ISO 45003 that's just come out pretty recently as well, so the timing is really good. And I suppose maybe just to explain, when we're talking about psychosocial risks and psychosocial hazards, the ones that I would have been looking at in terms of my thesis were aligned to the Health and Safety Executives Management Standards in the UK.
Okay,
so you've got demands, control, support, role, relationships, and I know I'm forgetting one because there's 6.
Yeah, that's.
You can tell me what the 6th one is, Brian.
I have to Google it here.
Change. That's it. Change. Yeah. And look, it was really, as I said, really trying to open up that conversation around work-related stress, because you can't really tackle work-related stress unless you actually know what the primary stressors are.
Yeah.
And I think the thing as well with construction is there's such a diversity of roles in the industry. So you've got everything from your general operatives on site, your tower crane operators, your engineers, very, very technical, working on very complex projects that have huge cognitive requirements. So you just can't take a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to work-related stressors, because the stressors for general operatives and for commercial or technical or engineering are probably not going to be the same. So I think it's really important for organizations that if they're going down the route of ISO 45003, if they're going down the route of looking at stress surveys and things like that, that they give really, really good consideration to the different types of roles within their organization and breaking those out so they're capturing them separately. Yeah.
And yes, and I've introduced ISO 45003 in a number of previous episodes this season. Just launched in June of this year. It's so the first standard, if you like, first global standard for mental well-being in the workplace. And you touched on the UK standards. Peter Kelly, who would have been involved in those, was also involved in ISO 45003. And even before, I had Mary-Ann Bainton on a previous episode this season as well, who would have been heavily involved in the Canadian standard, which was actually a precursor to both of these. But great to hear again. You sound like you're ahead of the game here, certainly in Ireland, based on what you're doing on the UK standards. And I imagine now, will ISO 45003, which is essentially, so it's a how-to guide, if you like, is this going to inform what you're doing now? Is this going to be like a guide? And if so, how would you go about kind of adopting that in the workplace or in a workplace like SISK?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the results that I have from the thesis would really help to inform us in terms of what the stressors are within our organization. I mean, look, ISO 45003, I think this is an absolute game changer for organizations that are really serious about work-related stress and the broader mental health picture. I'm not saying that all mental health cases are solely down to work-related stress, but it's a huge factor, absolutely a huge factor. So I think if organizations are really serious about the mental health agenda, they need to get into this mindset of kind of going, right, well, at an organizational level, what can we actually do to try and prevent some of these things happening in the first place? And you can't do that if you don't know what the stressors are for people. So I guess the good thing about ISO 45003 is it's very, very practical. It's guidance for people. And I think that's what people need. They need a framework, they need a structure, because talking to some people, there's almost this sense of unease or worry maybe about, right, well, if we go down this route, but we're not really prepared, and we don't have the resources, and we don't have the capability to deal with what actually comes out of it. So I think having this fairly straightforward framework and very sort of practical tools that organizations can put in place is going to be massive. So for us, ISO 45003 is as key strategic objective for 2022.
Okay, and so you've actually, so it's called out in your strategic plan, if you like?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because again, it's just trying to get into for us to try and look at the whole mental health agenda. Is we need to look at it from the health promotion side. How do we empower? How do we educate? How do we inform people around mental health and positive mental health? Then you've got that health protection, health prevention piece in the middle. And I think a big part of that is around the psychosocial risks. And then you have the sort of the health management pillar as well. So, more reactive in nature. Somebody becomes unwell, or somebody discloses a challenge or an issue. How do we respond? How do we help that person? What resources and supports do we have to try and get that person maybe back to work, or to keep them in work, keep them well? So I think it's just trying to get into the mindset of looking at it holistically, but a big part of that is psychosocial risk.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think you're so right that I think this certainly can be a game changer for a lot of organizations, because so many well-intentioned, individuals and organizations out there that are in this almost random acts of wellness, I call it, this kind of cycle of just choosing intervention after intervention, almost entirely focused on the individual. The fruit bowls and the 1 hour talks here and there, there's a role for them. No question, there is a role placed for them. But if what ISO 45003 does, it just shifts things back to the organizational level, as you said, and just looking at those risks, the risk assessment effectively. Similar, and if people only take one thing, I think, from ISO 45003, it's treat your approach to mental well-being the same way you would do like your physical health and safety. So look at the psychological health and safety in the same way. Start with your risk assessment, identify the hazards, and then work from there, and then choose your interventions, from there based on that. So I think it's going to be huge. Yeah,
and again, I suppose what's important as well, because I know it's probably, some people might be listening to me going, yeah, that's fine for you. You have, you have dedicated resources and you have a team to try and manage this. We lots of organizations won't have that, but I think it's important that it doesn't become overcomplicated either. It doesn't mean that you have to go and do a complete reorg and a restructure of the organization. Actually, if you find out what those primary stressors are for individuals, you might find that some of them are quite simple sort of things. They could be environmental, they could be related to facilities, they could be related to Wi-Fi, they could be quite simple things.
Could be the rosters, it could be just making simple changes like that.
Yeah,
exactly. Having those initial conversations is key, isn't it? It might even be a focus group if you're a small team, just getting people's viewpoints and just understanding where the kind of the stressors are, as you say, and then maybe putting a bit of focus and attention on those.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of steps in that process. I think the stress survey is actually gathering that data and gathering that information and making sure that you use a recognized tool such as the HSE stress indicator tool, for example. 35 stress indicator statements, quite easy for people to fill in. Not going to take a huge amount of time. If it's structured correctly and they have the right demographics, I think that should be the starting point. And then you can lead into things like focus groups to try and really get behind what the data and what you're actually getting out of the survey piece. And what you need is people obviously coming to those focus groups, not just presenting problems, but actually also presenting the solutions to those problems as well. So it's how you set those up.
Absolutely, yeah. Just out of curiosity, have you used workpositive.ie?
I've had a look at it.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't actually used it. It was one of the tools that I looked at for my thesis, but I just decided to go with the stress indicator tool. Okay. But as far as I'm aware, they're based on the same psychosocial risks.
Sure. Okay, yeah, because I share workpositive.ie quite often, but I'll get the link up to the stress indicator tool as well.
Yeah, and again, I know you'll hear. I'm sure you'll be familiar with Patricia Murray in the HSA as well. So she's organizational psychologist. So Patricia leads on work positive.
Yeah,
and I know is heard her speak a few times. Very sort of keeps it simple, very practical stuff for organizations. But I know it's a great support for any organization that's thinking of going down the route of using the work positive tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I must reach out to Patricia to come on the podcast. If kind of final question in this area, Richie, you want to be conscious of your time here. I guess quite often when we're running an intervention, when we have the data, when we know what the area you want to focus on, it's often, let's say it is an intervention where people need to kind of turn up for, say, quite often it's the people that are already well, that are already healthy, already have that mindset that will show up. Any thoughts on how we might encourage people to, if it's just get off the couch kind of thing and get involved in what we're doing, the people that are less likely to get involved? Any thoughts on how we might target those with our interventions?
Yeah, I think that's the big one, Brian, for all organizations. I'm sure people will be nodding, going, yeah. I think we can all relate to that. Look, I mean, and again, going back to sort of what's the science telling us? The science is telling us that generally in workplaces, you have about 15% of your workforce that are healthy and well. Whether that's by accident or design, that's generally what it is. And as you said, what tends to happen is lots of those people come to your programs and your initiatives, and that's great and that's fine. But they're not the people that need it.
Yeah.
Because they are healthy and well. They're probably there because they have an interest in nutrition, or they have an interest in sleep quality, or they want to take part in the 10K run, or whatever the case may be. The group that we want to reach are the next 55% of our workforce, which are the at-risk group. Mm-hmm. And what do we mean by the at-risk group? So they are people who are not clinically unwell, but they're on the road to becoming clinically unwell. Mm-hmm. Whether that's because they have poor lifestyle habits, like they consume too much alcohol, they smoke, and they're pre-diabetic, so they have poor diet practices, they have poor sleep hygiene, all of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So how do we reach that group is the key. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying we're there by any stretch of the imagination, we're not. But I look back to something like, we earlier on this year, we ran a sort of a team-based physical activity challenge. And I know it's very easy to run these things for 2 or 3 weeks, and people get very, very competitive, and then they just drop it and they just go back to normal. So what we wanted to try and do in that situation was to try and get a core number of people to sign up initially, and we would have reached out to particular individuals, whether they were our mental health ambassadors, well-being champions, just people that you build a connection up with and you see have been participating in these things and can be our influencers, if you like. Yeah. And we would have reached out to those people and said, right, okay, can you now go away and form a team? Mm-hmm. Because I'm not going to put you and your 4 friends together in this team. I want you to go back to your office or to your project and try and actually look for people that you know ordinarily mightn't participate in these things, and try and really encourage them. Look, that works in some cases, it doesn't work in other situations. But I think it's really trying to, again, engage with people at that peer-to-peer level. And even using the term influencers, it's not, I'm not a social media person, but that's probably what I equate it to, is trying to build up this network of people right across the business that we know will help us reach out to those at-risk individuals. I think the personal stories piece helps as well, because I think people do resonate and connect with those personal stories, and you try and normalize some of those challenges for people, and they feel more comfortable then coming forward and either looking for help or getting involved in different programs and initiatives. But that physical activity challenge that we ran this year, we had 250 people that took part in it. So that's not bad on the face of it, but in my head, I'm kind of going, for next year, how do we get that to 500? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do we try and actually link into a lot of those 250 people that took part this year and try and encourage them to literally buddy up with somebody else and really try and grow it? Look, it's not easy for sure. I think there's other there's other elements as well. There's other roles that people have to play. So I think line managers have a big responsibility in this as well. I think we should be looking at things like building it into people's goals and objectives, building it into line managers' goals and objectives. But there's a huge piece as well there around role modeling behaviors.
Yeah, leading by example.
It's leading by example, and that's not just for the senior leadership. That's for people at all levels.
That's
yeah,
and it's so interesting. We're back to the peers again, the influencers, if you like, but the influence that it's your peers really, well, your peers and maybe your direct manager. The influence that the people around you have is powerful. And what I find, what's even the personal stories you're touching on again, what I find is it's important that they're kind of relatable as well. And it's great when we have the marathon runners and the ultra marathon runners celebrated, but equally and more importantly, I think it's the person who's run their first couch to 5K, or the person who's given up smoking. Yeah. This kind of idea, the more relatable people. Because it's very hard to relate to those, ultra marathon runners if we're coming from a low base.
Yeah, and I think as well, Brian, I think it's for a lot of people going back to kind of at an individual sort of level. It's they have to be small, sustainable changes for people, and I think that applies to health and well-being in general. People are overloaded with information, whether that's in work or outside work. I think we're all overloaded with information. So you have a much better chance of engaging with somebody who might be in that at-risk category if you're keeping it very simple. There are small, simple changes that they can make. So me as a health coach, if I was sitting down with somebody to do a one-to-one, and again, anybody else that's a nutrition or health coach will relate to this, you don't go in all guns blazing and expect people, right, you need to change your breakfast, you need to change this, you need to start doing this. You don't give them 20 things straight off.
0 to 100 on day one, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, we know the crash diets don't work. So it's small, simple, sustainable changes. So I might say to somebody in that situation going, right, well, what are you willing to change? So you're trying to empower them. I don't want it to be my decision. I want it to be their decision. And they need to understand why it's their decision and the reason they're doing it. And you then get a person maybe to a point where they start to see the benefits, or they start to see the results of those small changes, and then it becomes self-motivating.
So they're intrinsically motivated to continue it. Yeah. That's where we want to get to, certainly. Yeah. And you touched on it here, and I'm just very briefly then because I'm really interested in the idea of how can we get can we get these kind of goals and objectives in our end of year reviews is it for leadership? Is it for line managers? And you've touched on that as well. Is that something you're interested in or interested in exploring yourself?
Yeah, it is. And again, it's not something that we've done to this point, but I think it's something that we are seriously considering. I think with something like that, you just need to be careful that it's, I don't know, that there isn't a backlash to it, that, you don't want people doing these things for the wrong reasons either. You do want it to be a hearts and minds thing. Yeah. So say, for example, if we have our mental health champions, our ambassadors, who are out there offering informal peer support, they have all volunteered to do that. And I would never want to think that anybody's forced into becoming a mental health ambassador or a person that's giving informal peer support. The same way we wouldn't or we shouldn't pressurize people into becoming, occupational first aiders. It has to be something that they volunteer for. So I think it's really, really key then around the line manager, team member conversation, but also that brings into play how important it is that our line managers are trained, that they have a good level of understanding and awareness. They don't need to be counselors or psychotherapists or exercise or experts in any area of health and well-being, but they just need to be able to have that open, honest conversation with members of their team. And again, almost try and see if they can agree on some sort of doesn't need to be overly complex, but some sort of a simple goal that they could try and achieve over the coming 6 months or 9 months or a year. And what actually can we as an organization do to try and facilitate that?
Yeah.
Because again, sometimes people can set themselves health goals, but are our work environments actually set up to support and facilitate that? In a lot of cases, they're not.
Yeah.
But it has to be something that's practical. It has to be something that the organization can support as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And you're touching on already what I would have been my first suggestion is make sure you involve the individual, the let's say your wellbeing champions, utilize your wellbeing champion network, your boots on the ground, let them inform what those objectives, those goals might look like. To have it come from your colleagues as opposed to from the something the leadership team are kind of forcing down on the population.
Yeah, it's a bit like, you know, I've heard conversations in the past where there's been talk about writing it into people's goals and objectives that they must go to at least 2 well-being initiatives a year, and you're kind of just there going, like, that's just completely the wrong approach to take, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a way to do it. There's a way to do it. It's about exploring what works for your particular organization and how it can be facilitated, as you said. But I think it's definitely one to watch. It's an interesting one. I know there's a couple of organizations in Ireland exploring it at the moment. I've seen it in the US with a couple of organizations. They might have, it's line manager based. So let's say 10% of the line managers' objectives for the year are based on, and it's aggregated, it's anonymized across the team. But let's say if their overall well-being indicator, they're looking to reach a certain level and to try and improve upon that kind of year on year.
Yeah,
that's kind of how it works in a couple of organizations I've seen in the US.
Okay. Yeah, interesting to see how it develops here.
Absolutely, yeah. You could be another trendsetter there, so we'll check back in with you in a couple of years, see how you're getting on.
Trendsetter, never been called that before.
You busy work life there, clearly. Family life as well. Just how are you? Or do you manage to spend any time on your own well-being? How does that work?
It'd be pretty awful if I said no at the end of all that. Yeah, no, look, I do. Yeah, you're right. Work is busy. Life is busy. I have 2 small kids. I have a 4 and a 5-year-old. And as I said, they certainly keep you energized and they keep you on your toes, but they actually also help you to switch off from work as well. I'd be very conscious of my own well-being, Brian. I would say certainly at the start of this year, I found it particularly tough. Like a lot of people, I guess, you know, we were obviously back in lockdown after Christmas. Case numbers were through the roof. We were back to having the kids here trying to work from home. So the first few months were really tough, like it was for a lot of people. But I think what's really important is having that level of self-awareness, or being able to acknowledge when you're actually struggling as well. And you kind of go, right, well, where am I on my mental health continuum? Right, okay, well, I'm not in the best place. Maybe I'm struggling, or maybe I'm surviving. What can I actually do to try and get myself out of that space then as well, in terms of lifestyle habits? Like for me, the thing that really works best for me is exercise, to be honest. Probably not doing as much as I used to. You know, again, pre-kids, you could disappear off for days and go run mountains and all that kind of stuff. But I'm a little bit more constrained now. So yeah, look, I would exercise quite a bit. I get out for my few runs every week. I'm trying to get back into a bit more biking. Love a bit of Lego. Find it very, very, it's almost like my mindfulness, if you like. Just love getting my head down and yeah, just spending hours on Lego. And I guess now the fact that I have my masters out of the way, it has freed up a little bit more time for me as well, which is great. But yeah, look, there's things absolutely I can do better. I'm pretty good on the hydration front. My bedroom is technology-free zone. I just don't bring phones into the bedroom at all. Just on the mindfulness piece, I've dipped in and out of it in the past. I'm dipping in and out of it at the moment. I haven't built a proper routine around mindfulness. So that's something that I'd be keen to try and improve. But yeah, overall, I'm doing okay.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. Yeah, and well, that Lego, well, it might be a bit of mindfulness, but it's great to. I'm sure the kids, the 4 and 5-year-olds, will be all over that as well, I'm sure.
Well, do you know what? That's actually going back to the stress piece. You know, when you're building a 2,500 piece Lego and your 4-year-old comes along and decides to start picking pieces off it and throwing them around the kitchen. Yeah, it's not the best.
Right, okay. Well, listen, Richie, I've really enjoyed that, and I did say the word trendsetter, and I mean that though. Like, you've got the education, you've got the experience, And I think you're probably the first, now it is brand new, but you're probably the first organization in Ireland that I've come across that is actually working towards the ISO 45003. So definitely think it can be a really positive example for organizations, not just in Ireland, but further afield. So listen, thanks so much for sharing so much with us today.
No problem, Brian. Great to chat.
Great to chat, Richie. We'll include all the links we mentioned and your own, if you like, we'll include your LinkedIn profile in the show notes as well. So Richie, have a great day. Thanks so much for joining us.
All right, Brian, mind yourself. Speak soon.
Hi, everyone. It's Brian here again. A big thank you for listening right to the end of this episode of the Work Well podcast. This podcast has been brought to you with thanks to our partners, AJ Products, who are leading the way in ergonomic and active workplace furniture solutions at ajproducts.ie. Original music that you're hearing right now was composed by my friend Greg Clifford. You can check out the website workwellpodcast.com, where you can access show notes for each episode and also find all our previous episodes. I would love if you could head over to iTunes or Google Play or wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. A reminder, you can head to workwellinstitute.org to check out the education programs that we have on offer. You're welcome to share this episode with your friends and colleagues so they too can discover and benefit from the content. And finally, if you have any suggestions for future topics you'd like to hear in the show, you can email me directly at brian@workwellpodcast.com. Remember to work well, stay safe, and I'll see you on the next episode.